July 13th, 1865. Just past noon. Broadway and Ann Street, Lower Manhattan. Smoke, black and thick, and rising fast. 15,000 people had walked through those doors that week, and now those doors were on fire. Barnum's American Museum, the most visited building in the United States, was burning to the ground. Animals screamed from the upper floors. A Bengal tiger leaped from a second-story window and crashed onto Broadway. A fireman named Johnny Denham allegedly killed it with an axe. Snakes slithered across the cobblestones. 2 beluga whales, the first ever displayed in captivity in America, boiled alive in their tank when firefighters shattered the glass, trying to drain the water to fight the blaze. The glass cracked. The water vanished. The whales cooked. Wax figures melted into pools on the museum floor like some kind of nightmare painting come to life. By 1 p.m, the most spectacular fire New York City had ever witnessed had reduced everything inside to ash. 850,000 exhibits gone. 24 years of a man's life work gone. And the man who built it all, the man who had turned fraud into an art form, wasn't even there. Phineas Taylor Barnum was somewhere else entirely, probably counting money, because that's what Barnum did. He counted money the way other men breathed. He counted it when he was rich. He counted it when he was bankrupt. And on the day his museum burned, you can bet he was already calculating what the disaster was worth in publicity. This is the story of the most audacious con man in American history. Not a gangster, not a politician, something more dangerous than both. A showman. A man who built his empire on lies, exploitation, and human suffering, and did it all in broad daylight, right in the shadow of the most violent neighborhood on earth. 5 Points, where the dead rabbits killed the Bowery boys, where a murder happened every night, where cholera and poverty and corruption rotted the streets until they sank into the swamp they were built on. And right there, blocks from all of it, P.T. Barnum sold tickets for 25 cents a head and made a fortune. This is the story of the showman who profited from the chaos, and the chaos that eventually caught up with him. But here is what the history books love to skip. Barnum didn't just deceive crowds. He bought a human being, an elderly, blind, paralyzed black woman. He worked her 10 to 12 hours a day, and when she died, he charged people 50 cents to watch a surgeon cut her open. That's who P.T. Barnum really was, and that's only where the story begins. He was born on July 5th, 1810, in Bethel, Connecticut. Small town, quiet. His father, Philo Barnum, was an innkeeper and tailor. His mother, Irene Taylor, kept the house. Nothing special about the family. But there was one person in young Phineas's life who changed everything. His grandfather, Phineas Taylor. The boy was named after him, and the old man treated the kid like a personal project. Grandfather Taylor was a practical joker, a lottery schemer, a local politician, a man who understood that the most valuable thing in the world wasn't money. It was attention, and he taught his grandson the first and most important lesson of his life. When Barnum was a boy, his grandfather gifted him a piece of property called Ivy Island. The family talked about it constantly. The neighbors were told. Everyone congratulated young Phineas on his great fortune. He was the richest boy in Bethel, they said. He owned land. For years the boy walked around believing he was wealthy. Then one day he went to see his inheritance. Ivy Island was a swamp, worthless, infested with snakes and briars. The whole family had been in on the joke. His grandfather had fooled him for years, and the neighbors had played along. You would think that kind of betrayal would crush a child. It didn't. It did the opposite. It taught Phineas Taylor Barnum that people will believe anything if you tell them with enough confidence. That lesson became the foundation of an empire. By his teens, Barnum was already hustling. He sold lottery tickets. He ran small stores. He had a gift for talking people into things. In 1829, at 19 years old, he married Charity Hallett, a seamstress from Bethel. They would have 4 daughters together over the next 17 years. Caroline in 1833, Helen in 1840, Frances in 1842, Pauline in 1846. Charity was steady, patient. She would need to be. In 1831, Barnum started a newspaper in Danbury, Connecticut. He called it the Herald of Freedom. He used it to attack local politicians and religious leaders he considered corrupt or hypocritical. Here is the thing about Barnum. He had absolutely no sense of caution. He called a local deacon named Seth Celia a usurer who cheated the poor. Celia sued for libel. Barnum was arrested 3 times for libel in 3 years. The 3rd time, the court sentenced him to 60 days in jail. Most men would have learned to keep quiet. Barnum turned his release into a public spectacle. He rode through Danbury in a carriage drawn by horses, accompanied by a brass band and a cannon salute. Hundreds of people lined the streets. He hadn't just survived jail. He had turned jail into a publicity event. But Bethel and Danbury were too small for a man like Barnum. In 1834, he moved to New York City, and that's when everything changed. The city was a battlefield. You have to understand what New York looked like in the 1830s and 1840s. Lower Manhattan was a war zone. The 5 Points neighborhood, just blocks from where Barnum would build his empire, was the worst slum in the Western world. Built on the filled-in remains of the Colic Pond, a 48-acre lake that had been dumped with trash and waste and paved over around 1811. The ground itself was rotten. Buildings sank. Streets filled with a foot of mud mixed with human waste and animal carcasses. Entire families lived in single rooms, 12 people packed together with no air and no light. The old brewery, a crumbling tenement on the edge of 5 Points, was rumored to see at least 1 murder every single night for 15 years. Gangs owned the streets. The 40 Thieves, the Roach Guards, the Dead Rabbits, the Bowery Boys. They fought each other with clubs and knives and sometimes with guns, right out in the open, while police either watched or ran. Cholera swept through regularly, killing hundreds. Tuberculosis was constant. Infant mortality was staggering. And yet, in the middle of all of this, on the corner of Broadway and Ann Street, barely a 15-minute walk from the heart of 5 Points, P.T. Barnum saw opportunity. You know what the difference is between a gangster and a showman in 19th century New York? The gangster takes your money at knife point. The showman makes you hand it over willingly. And then thank him for the privilege. In 1835, before the museum, Barnum found his first act, and it was the most despicable thing he ever did. A man in Philadelphia was exhibiting a blind, nearly paralyzed elderly black woman named Joyce Heth. He claimed she was 161 years old and had been the nursemaid of George Washington. Barnum saw the act and immediately recognized the potential. Slavery had been outlawed in New York and Pennsylvania, but Barnum exploited a legal loophole. He leased Heth for $1,000, borrowing $500 to close the deal. He put her on display, 10 to 12 hours a day. She could barely move. She could barely speak. And Barnum charged audiences to come stare at her while he told them she had held baby George Washington in her arms. Here is where it gets dark. When interest started to fade, Barnum planted a story in the newspapers claiming Joyce Heth wasn't actually a person at all. He told reporters she was an automaton, a mechanical device made of whalebone and rubber and old leather. The controversy doubled the crowds. People came to decide for themselves. Was she real, or was she a machine? She was a human being. She was suffering. And Barnum was selling tickets. Joyce Heth died in February of 1836. She was likely around 80 years old. And Barnum wasn't finished with her. He arranged a public autopsy in a New York saloon. 1,500 spectators paid 50 cents each to watch a surgeon cut open her body. $750 from a dead woman's corpse. The autopsy confirmed she was nowhere close to 161. The entire thing had been a fraud from the beginning. And Barnum? He walked away counting the money. No charges, no consequences. just profit. For the next 5 years, Barnum bounced around the entertainment business, promoting acts and looking for his next big play. He found it in 1841. Scudder's American Museum, a dusty, neglected collection of curiosities at the corner of Broadway, Park Row, and Ann Street, was up for sale. The building sat at the beating heart of Lower Manhattan. It was 5 stories tall. It faced City Hall, and it was blocks from 5 points, which meant foot traffic was enormous. Thousands of people walked past every day. Workers, immigrants, gangsters, tourists who came to gawk at the slum. Barnum bought the collection and the building for less than half its appraised value. On January 1st, 1842, he opened Barnum's American Museum, and Lower Manhattan would never be the same. You want to understand how Barnum made money? Here is the scheme broken down. The opportunity was foot traffic. Tens of thousands of people walked past that corner every single day. The connection was Barnum's genius for publicity. He plastered the building with enormous painted banners, visible from blocks away. He put a spotlight on the roof that could be seen across the East River. He hired a brass band to play on the balcony. Badly, so passers-by would come inside just to escape the noise. The execution was volume. Admission was 25 cents. For that quarter, you got access to everything. Dioramas, a flea circus, wax figures, a rifle range, an oyster bar, a dog-powered loom, exotic animals. A theater that seated 3,000. The money was staggering. At its peak, 15,000 visitors a day. Over 24 years, 38 million paid admissions. Do the math. 25 cents times 38 million. That is $9.5 million in 1800s money. And that was just the door. The concessions, the theater, the special exhibits, all of that was extra. But here is the problem, and this is what separates Barnum from a simple businessman. Many of those exhibits were fake. The Fiji mermaid, one of his biggest attractions, was the torso of a dead monkey sewn onto the tail of a fish. Barnum knew it was fake. He had an associate pose as a British naturalist named Dr. Griffin, who vouched for the mermaid's authenticity to newspaper editors. The papers printed the story. The crowds came. Barnum sold tickets. The scheme was brilliantly simple. Create a controversy. Plant both sides of the story. Let the public argue about it, and charge them to see it for themselves. And then there was General Tom Thumb. In 1842, Barnum discovered Charles Stratton, a 4-year-old boy from Bridgeport, Connecticut, who stood just over 2 feet tall. Barnum renamed him General Tom Thumb, claimed he was 11 years old to make his size seem more extraordinary, and put him on stage. The boy was charming. He could sing, dance, and do impressions. Audiences loved him. Barnum paid him $50 a week, which was decent money, and took him to Europe in 1844. They performed before Queen Victoria at Buckingham Palace. The Queen was fascinated. The press went wild. When Barnum returned to America, he was the most famous man in the country. Not a politician, not a general, a showman. The money from Tom Thumb funded everything. In 1848, Barnum built Iranistan, a Moorish revival mansion in Bridgeport, Connecticut. $150,000, 17 acres. Inspired by the Royal Pavilion in Brighton, England, with onion domes and arched doorways and a circular fountain in front, he hosted Mark Twain, Horace Greeley, and George Armstrong Custer at parties there. It was the most extravagant private residence in New England. Barnum was 48 years old. He had a museum that drew 15,000 people a day. He had a mansion that looked like a palace from the Arabian Nights. He was worth more than most men could dream. But here is what Barnum did next that defines him. In 1850, he brought Jenny Lind to America, the Swedish Nightingale, the most famous opera singer in the world. Barnum had never heard her sing a single note. Didn't matter. He offered her $1,000 per night for 150 concerts, all expenses paid. First class, everything. It was an insane gamble. He mortgaged his home and his museum to cover the costs. And he won. The marketing campaign for Jenny Lind was the most sophisticated thing America had ever seen. He planted stories in newspapers for months before she arrived. He organized a crowd of 30,000 people to greet her ship at the dock. He auctioned the first ticket to her New York concert for $225, which made national headlines. Jenny Lind performed 93 concerts under Barnum's management. She earned approximately $350,000. Barnum netted over $500,000 for himself. In today's money, that is close to $19 million from concerts in 1850. But here is the thing about Barnum. He wasn't a careful man. He wasn't a patient man. He was a gambler who happened to be brilliant at marketing. And in the 1850s, his gambling caught up with him. The Jerome Clock Company. This is the scheme that broke him. Barnum had been investing in real estate around East Bridgeport, trying to build a new community. He wanted a major company to relocate there, so he approached the Jerome Clock Company with an offer. He would endorse their promissory notes to help them move their factory. It was supposed to be a manageable arrangement. What Barnum didn't know was that the clock company was already drowning in debt. They kept sending him notes to endorse. He kept signing them. By the time he realized what had happened, he had endorsed over $500,000 in obligations. The clock company went bankrupt in 1856, and they took Barnum with them. He lost everything: his fortune, his credit, his reputation as a businessman. He owed creditors nearly $500,000. He was humiliated in the press. The man who had fooled millions had been fooled himself. And then, on December 17th, 1857, Iranistan burned to the ground. Workmen had been doing renovations on the empty mansion. They were told not to smoke inside. They smoked anyway. A pipe left smoldering ignited the blaze around 11 at night. By 1 in the morning, the palace was ashes. Barnum was at the Astor House in New York City when he received a telegram from his brother the next morning. The insurance payout was $28,000. The mansion had cost $150,000 to build. Barnum had lost his fortune and his palace in the space of 2 years. But this is where you see the difference between Barnum and every other man who went broke in 19th century America. He came back. He went on a lecture tour. He spoke about the art of money-getting. People paid to hear a bankrupt man explain how to get rich. You have to admire the audacity, even if you despise everything else about him. By 1860, he had repaid his debts and regained control of the American Museum. And then the Civil War came, and the chaos around Barnum's museum turned violent in ways even he couldn't monetize. In July of 1863, the New York City draft riots erupted. For 4 days, mobs rampaged through Manhattan. An estimated 120 people were killed. Buildings burned. Black men were lynched in the streets. The Colored Orphan Asylum on Fifth Avenue was set on fire, with children still inside. Barnum's museum, with its prominent location on Broadway, sat right in the path of destruction. Barnum himself had become a target. He was an outspoken supporter of the Union and had publicly advocated for abolition. His museum had staged productions of Uncle Tom's Cabin, which enraged pro-Southern sympathizers. The rioters threatened to burn the museum. They didn't, not that time, but the threat lingered. Then came November 25th, 1864, the night after Thanksgiving. A group of Confederate agents had infiltrated New York City with a plan to burn it to the ground. The original scheme had been even more ambitious. They wanted to seize federal buildings, arm Copperhead sympathizers, raise a Confederate flag over City Hall, and declare New York had left the Union. When federal troops poured into the city before the election, the Confederates abandoned the grand plan and settled for arson. 8 operatives armed with bottles of Greek fire, a chemical substance that supposedly ignited on contact with air, set fires in 13 hotels and several public buildings. Captain Robert C. Kennedy walked into Barnum's museum, packed with patrons on a busy Friday evening, and set a fire in a stairwell. The building erupted in panic. People stampeded for the exits. Women screamed. Children were trampled. By some miracle, no one was killed. The fire was extinguished quickly, but the message was clear. Barnum's museum was a target, a symbol, and symbols get destroyed. That destruction came 8 months later. July 13th, 1865. The fire we started this story with. A broken gas line in a neighboring restaurant is the suspected cause. The flames spread fast. The 5-story building was consumed within hours. Every animal exhibit, every curiosity, every piece of Barnum's 24-year collection was destroyed. The beluga whales, the wax figures, the Fiji mermaid, the stage where Uncle Tom's Cabin had played to packed houses, all of it gone. Barnum opened a new museum at 539 Broadway, between Spring and Prince Streets, on September 6, 1865. Less than 2 months after the fire. You want to know what drove this man? That's what drove him. The inability to stop, the refusal to accept loss as permanent. But fate, or bad luck, or the sheer combustibility of 19th century buildings, wasn't done with him. On March 3, 1868, the new museum burned down too. That was it. No more museums. 2 buildings, 2 fires, millions of dollars in losses. Barnum was 57 years old, and the museum business had tried to kill him twice. But here is what Barnum did. He didn't retire. He didn't grieve. He reinvented himself entirely. In 1871, at the age of 60, he launched P.T. Barnum's Grand Traveling Museum, Menagerie, Caravan, and Hippodrome. The Circus, the thing he would ultimately be remembered for. 10 years later, in 1881, he merged with James Bailey to create Barnum and Bailey, the greatest show on earth. In 1882, he purchased Jumbo, the famous African elephant, from the London Zoo for $10,000. Jumbo became the biggest attraction in America. Children across the country knew the elephant's name before they knew the president's. And somewhere in the middle of all this, Barnum went into politics. He served 2 terms in the Connecticut legislature, starting in 1865, where he spoke in favor of the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery. The man who had leased Joyce Heth, the man who had forced a blind, paralyzed black woman to perform for 12 hours a day, then charged people to watch her autopsy. That man stood in the Connecticut legislature and argued for abolition. You can call it redemption. You can call it hypocrisy. You can call it the most Barnum thing Barnum ever did, using whatever position suited him at whatever moment served him best. In 1875, he was elected mayor of Bridgeport. He improved the water supply, brought gas lighting to the streets, and cracked down on prostitution and illegal liquor sales. Charity Barnum, his wife of 44 years, died in 1873. Barnum remarried the following year. His new wife, Nancy Fish, was 40 years younger than him. He was 63. She was 24. Even his personal life had the quality of a sideshow. On April 7th, 1891, Phineas Taylor Barnum died at his home in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He was 80 years old. He had suffered a stroke. And here is the detail that tells you everything you need to know about who this man was. His last coherent words were a question. He asked about the day's box office receipts for the circus. Not about his children, not about his legacy, the receipts, the money, the count. He was buried in Mountain Grove Cemetery in Bridgeport, a cemetery he had designed himself, because of course he did. Even in death, the showman had to control the show. So what does the story of P.T. Barnum reveal? Not about the circus, not about museums, about America. Barnum built his career in the shadow of 5 Points, where gangs slaughtered each other in the streets and poverty killed more people than violence ever did. He operated blocks from the most dangerous neighborhood in the Western world, and he turned that location into a gold mine. 38 million visitors, millions of dollars. While the Dead Rabbits and the Bowery Boys fought on the streets nearby, Barnum charged 25 cents to see a mermaid made from a dead monkey. While Confederate agents tried to burn his building down, he rebuilt within 2 months. While the draft riots tore the city apart, His museum kept selling tickets. He exploited a slave. He exhibited human beings as curiosities. He made a fortune from hoaxes and lies, and he was celebrated for it. He was loved for it. He became the most famous man in America, not despite the fraud, but because of it. People knew he was a humbug. He called himself one, and they paid him anyway. That's the real story. Not the circus, not the showmanship. The fact that in 19th century America, in the shadow of 5 points, a man could buy a human being, lie about everything, profit from other people's misery and fascination in equal measure, and die a hero. He wasn't arrested. He wasn't shot. He wasn't indicted. He died in his own bed asking about ticket sales. The gangsters of 5 points were brutal. They killed openly. They stole without shame. But most of them died young, broke, and forgotten. Barnum did everything they did. Exploitation. Deception. Profiting from human weakness. He just did it with a smile and a 25-cent ticket, and he lived to 80. That's the showman who profited from the chaos. Phineas Taylor Barnum. He didn't change the rules. He proved they never existed. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe. We drop new stories every week about the real people who shaped the underworld. Drop a comment below. What figure from history should we cover next?